throne room's keeper. The silence in the castle was deceptive, though the whispers had ceased and the air no longer bristled with restless energy. Ellie felt a foreboding presence as they made their way toward the throne room. Each step echoed in the dim corridors, the sound swallowed by the vast, empty halls. "This place feels wrong," Callum muttered, gripping the crowbar he carried tightly. Ellie glanced at him, her own nerves stretched thin. "The curse might be broken, but the castle isn't finished with us." Dr. Royce adjusted his satchel, his usual confidence replaced by a cautious demeanor. "The throne room," he said, his voice tight. "It's always been central to the castle's history, its power. If there's anything left of the curse, it's bound to be there." Ellie nodded. "Then that's where we end this." Entering the throne room, the heavy wooden doors loomed before them, carved with intricate designs of lions and thistles. Though worn by time, the artistry still conveyed authority and menace. Ellie hesitated, her hand hovering over the iron ring that served as a handle. "It feels like it's waiting," she murmured. "Then let's not keep it," Callum said, though his voice betrayed his fear. Ellie pulled the door open, the groan of its hinges echoing through the cavernous space. The throne room was vast, its high ceiling supported by thick stone columns that cast long shadows in the flickering torchlight. At the far end of the room stood the throne itself, a jagged, imposing seat carved from dark stone. The air was heavy with an unnatural chill, and Ellie felt her skin prickle as she stepped inside. The room seemed alive, its shadows shifting and writhing as though aware of their presence. "We're not alone," Royce whispered, his breath visible in the freezing air. Ellie's gaze locked onto the throne. A figure sat upon it, its form indistinct and shrouded in darkness. The shadows around it thickened, coalescing into a massive, malevolent shape that seemed to watch them with an almost palpable intensity. The entity's warning. The figure shifted, its movements deliberate and slow. When it spoke, its voice was a deep, resonant growl that seemed to come from all directions at once. "You have disrupted the balance." Ellie took a cautious step forward, her flashlight trembling in her grip. "The curse is broken," she said, her voice steady. "The spirits are free. This doesn't have to continue." The entity let out a low, menacing laugh. "You misunderstand, mortal. The curse is a mere fragment of what binds me here. The castle's pain, its despair, they are my sustenance. I will not be cast aside so easily." Callum stepped up beside Ellie, his crowbar raised. "We're not afraid of you," he said, though his shaking hands betrayed him. The entity's form shifted, and the shadows surged forward, forcing Callum to stumble back. "You should be," it hissed. The battle of light and shadow. The room exploded into chaos as the shadows came alive, swirling around the trio like a storm. Ellie felt the cold tendrils of darkness clawing at her, pulling her toward the throne. She swung her flashlight wildly, the beams slicing through the shadows, but doing little to deter them. "Stay together," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the entity's power. Callum and Royce moved closer, their flashlights creating a faint circle of protection against the encroaching darkness. The entity roared, its form expanding as it rose from the throne. Its jagged silhouette towered above them, its hollow eyes burning with a malevolent light. "You cannot undo centuries of pain," it growled. "The castle is mine. Its shadows are eternal." Ellie clenched her jaw, her mind racing. She couldn't fight the entity with brute force. It was too powerful, too entrenched in the castle's foundation. But she remembered the prophecy. Only the humble shall lift the curse. Distracted, Ellie shouted to Callum and Royce, confronting the throne. While Callum and Royce shone their flashlights at the entity, Ellie sprinted toward the throne. The shadows lashed out at her, but she pushed through, her determination outweighing her fear. The throne was colder than ice, its surface jagged and rough beneath her hands. As Ellie pressed her palms against the stone, she felt a surge of energy coursing through her, a torrent of anger, grief, and despair. "This isn't your power," she said, her voice firm. "It belongs to the people who suffered here, the people you've imprisoned." The entity roared, its shadowy form surging toward her. "You dare defy me?" Ellie didn't flinch. "You don't belong here," she said. "And neither do they." The power of memory. Ellie closed her eyes, focusing on the memories of the castle. She thought of the piper, his mournful tune echoing through the tunnels. She thought of the plague victims, their prayers unanswered as they faced their fate. She thought of the Douglas brothers, betrayed and executed in the Great Hall. "You don't own their pain," she said, her voice rising. "You fed on it, twisted it, but it's not yours to keep." The throne trembled beneath her hands, and the room filled with a deafening hum. The shadows recoiled, their movements frantic and erratic. Callum and Royce watched in awe as the entity faltered, its massive form shrinking as Ellie's words pierced its defenses. Releasing the spirits, the hum reached a crescendo, and Ellie felt the throne begin to crack beneath her touch. Light erupted from the fractures, illuminating the room with a blinding brilliance. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into the light as the entity let out one final, anguished roar. The light spread outward, consuming the throne and filling the room with warmth. Ellie felt the weight of centuries lifting, the castle's pain giving way to peace. When the light faded, the throne was gone, replaced by a smooth, empty floor. The air in the room was still, and the oppressive chill had vanished. A castle at peace. Ellie staggered back, her legs trembling as she tried to catch her breath. Callum and Royce rushed to her side, their faces filled with relief. "Is it over?" Callum asked, his voice hushed. Ellie nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. "The castle's free." As they made their way back to the Great Hall, the silence felt different, no longer heavy with dread but calm and serene. The castle, once a prison of pain and despair, now seemed at rest. Royce adjusted his glasses, his voice thoughtful. "You've done something extraordinary here, Miss Cartwright. You've given this place a chance to heal." Ellie glanced back at the throne room, her expression bittersweet. "It's not just the castle. It's the people who suffered here. They're free now, too." A warning lingers. As they stepped into the light of the castle's courtyard, Ellie felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The spirits were gone, and the curse had been lifted, but the castle's history remained, its stones still bearing the weight of centuries. Callum clapped her on the back, his grin wide. "You did it, Ellie. You actually did it." Ellie nodded, though her gaze lingered on the darkened windows of the castle. "Shadows never rest," she said softly. "We've set them free, but the memories will always be here." Royce placed a hand on her shoulder. "And it's our responsibility to remember them, to ensure their stories are never forgotten." Ellie smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure we do it right." As they left the castle behind, the wind whispered through the ruins, carrying with it the faintest hint of a melody, a piper's tune, soft and free at last. Lingering shadows. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting faint golden beams through the castle's fractured windows. Ellie, Callum, and Royce made their way to the main courtyard, their footsteps echoing softly against the ancient stones. The castle, once oppressive and alive with malevolence, now felt eerily quiet, like a predator that had finished its hunt. Ellie paused at the edge of the courtyard, her gaze lingering on the towering silhouette of the castle. Its darkened windows seemed to watch her, and though the air felt lighter, she couldn't shake the unease that prickled at the back of her neck. "It's over," Callum said, though his voice was tinged with uncertainty. He leaned heavily on the crowbar, his knuckles bruised and scraped. "Right?" Ellie didn't answer immediately. Her thoughts were a tangle of relief and doubt, her mind replaying the events in the throne room, the entity's chilling voice, the shadows that had clawed at her, and the warmth she had felt as the throne crumbled. Royce adjusted his satchel, breaking the silence. "The castle is at rest for now, but places like this don't simply forget. The history here is too deep, too entrenched." Ellie glanced at him, her lips pressing into a thin line. The curse might be broken, but the memories remain, and memories can linger. The price of freedom. They reached the outer gates, the first taste of fresh morning air washing over them like a balm. Callum slumped against the gatepost, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Never again," he muttered, shaking his head. "You hear me, Ellie? Never again. No more haunted castles, no more curses, no more demons made of shadows." Ellie smirked faintly, though the humor didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see." Royce turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You did something extraordinary, Miss Cartwright. But extraordinary deeds often come at a cost. I suggest you be mindful of that." Ellie tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then gestured back toward the castle. "You've disrupted centuries of balance. Freed spirits that have been bound for generations. But balance, once broken, rarely restores itself neatly." Callum groaned. "Wonderful. So now we've got ghosts on layaway." Ellie ignored him, her gaze fixed on the castle. Royce's words struck a chord, and though she didn't want to admit it, she couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unfinished. The unseen watcher. As they descended the hill leading away from the castle, Ellie felt a peculiar weight pressing on her. The morning air was cool and crisp, the world around them alive with the sound of birdsong and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was serene too serene. Ellie slowed her steps, glancing over her shoulder. The castle loomed in the distance, its shadow stretching long and dark over the surrounding landscape. For a brief moment, she thought she saw movement in one of the high windows, a flicker of something that shouldn't have been there. Her stomach twisted, but when she blinked, the window was empty. "You okay?" Callum asked, his tone light but concerned. Ellie hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just tired." A question unanswered. The trio reached the bottom of the hill, where their car sat waiting by the side of the road. The vehicle was a welcome sight, its chipped paint and scuffed bumpers a reminder of the normal world that felt a million miles away from the castle's shadowed halls. Royce climbed into the passenger seat, leaning his head against the window. "I'll be in touch," he said softly. "There's still much to document, much to understand." Callum opened the driver's door and paused, his gaze flicking to Ellie. "You coming? Or are you planning on camping out here?" Ellie lingered by the roadside, her eyes drawn back to the castle. The faint melody of a piper's tune whispered through her mind, so soft she couldn't tell if it was real or imagined. She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm coming," she said finally, sliding into the back seat, a shadow within. The drive back to the city was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound as the tension slowly ebbed from their bodies. Callum and Royce exchanged occasional remarks, but Ellie remained silent, her thoughts consumed by the castle's lingering presence. When they reached the outskirts of Edinburgh, Callum pulled into a small cafe parking lot, muttering something about needing coffee before he fell asleep at the wheel. Royce followed him inside, leaving Ellie alone in the car. She exhaled slowly, leaning her head back against the seat. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to relax. But as she closed her eyes, a chill ran down her spine. Her hand brushed against something cold on the seat beside her. Ellie's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. She turned slowly, her breath catching as she saw it. A faint imprint on the seat, as though someone, or something, had been sitting there. The air in the car grew cold, and Ellie's pulse quickened. She turned back toward the front windshield, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. But it wasn't alone. A shadowy figure lingered in the back corner of the car, its hollow eyes watching her with silent intent. Ellie's breath hitched, and when she blinked, the figure was gone. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door handle, stepping out of the car into the sunlight. The warmth of the day did little to ease the chill that had settled in her chest. Shadows never rest. When Callum and Royce returned, they found Ellie leaning against the car, her expression distant. "You okay?" Callum asked, handing her a cup of coffee. Ellie took it without answering, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. She could still feel the castle's shadow, heavy and persistent, like a faint echo in the back of her mind. Royce placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's done, Miss Cartwright. The castle is free." Ellie forced a faint smile. "Maybe, but some shadows never really go away." As they drove back into the city, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone, that the shadows she had fought in the castle had followed her, clinging to her like an unwelcome memory. And as the skyline of Edinburgh rose before them, she caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure in the rearview mirror, a tall, dark silhouette, its hollow eyes watching her from the distance. The castle might be at peace, but Ellie knew the shadows would always be with her,